So, we are going to get started here. It's 10:29 my time, which means it's 11:29 the time the con is in. Um, so yeah, we are doing, this is writing for fan games. We are going to introduce ourselves in a second, but just generally speaking, this is a primarily Q&A panel. There is a channel called Panelist Questions, which you can ask your questions in, and we'll answer them. So yeah, I mean, you can ask about fandom creation, game creation, writing. It's primarily writing, so like if you ask a lot of overly technical questions, you might not necessarily get a cognizant response, but like if you want to ask some sort of like writing adjacent stuff about the technical things, we've all kind of worked in that department to some degree. So yeah, I'm joined by three additional panelists. Yes, there is a game dev panel. Era points out. It's Uber the Meh has a pre-recorded panel called something I don't remember. It's a game dev panel, but it primarily deals with like more of the technical like accessibility aspects of game creation. So that's like a kind of a good like introduction to that. That is happening later today. I don't remember the time offhand, but
It's the Game Dev Survival Guide, and it'll
that's
be
the stuff.
happening at
Thank
4
you.
p.m. EST, right after my second panel.
Yeah, nice. So anyway, we're gonna start introductions and introduce ourselves. We're gonna start from bottom to top. So Bucky, then I will do Arrow because Arrow is unable to be on voice chat right now, and then Robin, and then myself. So go for it.
Hello, my name is Bucky Grant. I am a writer for New Game Plus, Midnight City, and Friendsim 2. My pronouns are they, them, or he, here, and yeah, that's me.
And Arrow, if you want to type an introduction, I will read it. Although I will say, we've got Arrow writing. Arrow is a writer for a number of games, including Midnight City, Befriendus, and Friendsim 2, and possibly other things. They're typing in chat right now, so I can see if they have other things to say.
I agree with Daft.
Bear with us for a minute. Yes, Arrow is a talented writer. I am really looking forward to working with them on stuff, and have enjoyed working with them so far on stuff.
Arrow has a good grasp
absolutely.
on like.
Okay, I've got to
humor.
do the voice. I've got to do the fucking voice because they say Troy McClure voice. Hi, I'm Eromancery. You might remember me from such games as Midnight City, Befriendus, Friendsim 2, and Operation Stormastray. I'm not familiar with that last one. But yeah, so that's Arrow. Robin.
Hello, I'm Robin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the directors of Befriendus. I mostly handle the writing side. And I also wrote the Signless's route for Distantquest.
Excellent. And my name is Jonaya. I use she, her pronouns. I am a writer and narrative director for New Game Plus, and I am the director and lead writer for Friendsim 2. So yeah, we are going to get this started. We have a number of questions already, but we're basically just going to start at the top and answer your questions. So our first question from Techno Alchemist: how do you guys go about making the basic structure of your stories? Like, do you guys make a story skeleton or something else? And I won't hog going first on this one, so whoever wants to jump in first, go for it.
I think it definitely depends on what scale you're talking about, but basically, yes, I like to be somewhere in between. I think if you've ever used National Novel Writing Month, they like give you like a little personality quiz sort of dealio where you say like, do you prefer to plan your stories ahead of time? Do you prefer to go by the seat of your pants, or are you like somewhere in between? I'm definitely somewhere in between in the sense that I don't plan out every single detail ahead of time, but it is nice to have a skeleton to work my way around. Like when we first came up with New Game Plus last year, we knew that our premise was we like the 5,000 year time skip, and we like sort of the themes of like, oh god, what do we do now that like the big adventure is over, because that's interesting. But we also wanted to explore, wait, 5,000 years have passed, that's the entirety of recorded human history thus far. Wouldn't politics change a smidge from 21st century democracy, air quotes? And like once you it's basically a matter for me of like picking the few anchor points that are important to me about a story, and then uh if you've ever had ADHD and cleaned, and you found that like anchoring yourself around one point and sort of spiraling around it lets you actually finish the thing, that's kind of also how I approach storytelling. I run around and like fill in different parts of it until I start getting something that looks cohesive,
Yeah.
like spinning a web.
So I tend to be I tend to be a very like intuitive writer. But when I do visual novel stuff, I typically start with a basic outline of like, here's all the plot points I want to hit. Here are the like general themes. Here are the general like things that need to happen in the route. Here are the general choices, and then I actually go in and take that outline and then flesh it out to make the route. Like I have a very code-like writing style where I like basically write in a format where I can then like import it directly into RenPy. So I tend to like try to incorporate as much of the actual game structure into my script as I possibly can. That's for game writing specifically. When it comes to like general story writing, I tend to start with a loose outline and then build out from there.
Yeah, I write game scripts and general stories very differently. In that for scripts, I like to eventually reach a point in planning where I am doing what I call mad libsing it, where I know exactly how scenes are going to connect, and it's just a matter of making them happen, making them happen, making them happen. Which normally I don't enjoy as much as in writing, but scripts, especially for these fan games, I've found for me they get so unwieldy if I don't have a lot of pre-planning. That said, the plan keeps changing last minute almost every time. Arania's route for Befriendus had an entirely different good ending until I was over halfway through writing it. So I do a similar thing to what Jonaya was describing, where I write down, okay, what do I want to hit on in this writing? These Fansim scripts I tend to approach them like, one, character studies, two, what would it take to befriend this person? So I answer a few questions. What do I want to show you about this character? How can I give you meaningful choices? But it's not going to be a finished outline until I've just sat down and written some of my favorite scenes.
Yeah.
The meaningful choices thing is also important.
So for Arrow says, well, for visual novels I'm working on, the narrative directors, who are both in this panel, I'm basically given a start and an end point, and I just have to connect the two. So there's sort of a skeleton missing, like the rib cage, and I have to make up the rib cage, and also it has to not kill the creature once we throw the switch and bring it to life. So yeah,
it was so on brand for Arrow.
It was very on brand. Our next question from Blue Spectacles: what kinds of pieces are most important to have in your repertoire or portfolio, in terms of lore write-ups, character studies, or otherwise, to have a good foundation to start with? I'm not going to answer this one first either, because I feel like the next question is kind of my wheelhouse. But I don't know, Robin or Arrow, if y'all want to take this one first. Probably Robin, because Arrow's got to type it out.
Yeah, I can take this one first. One thing I want to say is I know very little about the professional writing world. This is not my profession. So in terms of portfolio for other people hiring you for their game, unfortunately, I don't really have anything to say there. In terms of writing to have under your belt to feel ready to write a game script, anyone who has played the Signless's Distantquest route is probably aware that I suffer from way too much narration disease. So something that's been important to me is getting good at that kind of snappy dialogue and figuring out how to use dialogue in a way that matters a lot in a very brief space. And I also think for the specific type of game that I've been working on, which are these Friendsim style routes, character studies have been important just because you really want someone who entirely understands the character they're writing before they get into it, you know?
Yeah.
Someone who has something to say.
So I guess for me, it's kind of like, there's the aspect of it from like what would be good for you to have as far as like building up your skills, and then there's also what would be good for like a director of the game to see. Like personally, as a director of the game or someone that's evaluating a writer, I just want to see that they like can write well. Like you can learn how to write a script But like, if you know how to write well, you can write a script with some additional training and some additional work. I think the biggest thing for me would be to see examples of like dialogue and dialogue focused writing, because like script writing is very dialogue based, and like being able to create like snappy dialogue that's fun to read, that doesn't get old or dragged down. As far as being a writer, I think just like having a lot of different kinds of writing, like obviously you're probably going to be talking about fiction because that's what we're talking about here, but like doing different tone, different style, and different like forms of presentation, and just playing around with that, because it shows a level of like versatility as a writer, which I think is important.
I was gonna say versatility because for these fan games, especially, like between the way that we structured the Friendsim 2 routes, which involve more than one character, and then New Game Plus has over 100 non-player character. Well, yeah, over 100 non-Homestuck non-player characters. So there's a lot of NPCs, which means people like obviously we're looking for people to write specific characters, but you need to be able to write more than one character. Definitely versatility, definitely dialogue, and also like I like to see people who do. One of my favorite things about the Homestuck fandom for ages and ages has been like interest in AUs, and how we have all of these we've had for years prolific fan fiction in a wild amount of AUs. It's not just your standard coffee shop, high school, college AUs. Somebody's doing something weird with fan fiction all the time, and it's fantastic. So like I do like to see what people explore and what people like to play around with in their writing. I don't just like to see people's Homestuck fan fiction, but like what other fandoms are they writing for? Are they doing any original work? Do they do any RP? There's a lot of different styles of writing that you can look at that don't have to necessarily be prose writing.
Yeah, and Era says, genre is so malleable for this type of game. I think it might help more to focus on good narrative voice. As long as it is fun to read, you can fit what you write to suit your comfort zone. Our next question from Nix is, how much does the technical aspect of game dev stuff affect your writing? Like, would you say it influences and alters your initial ideas a lot when gameplay or format limitations crop up or not? So I'm going to take this one first, because I do a lot of the technical stuff. I'm doing the programming for New Game Plus and Friendsim 2, and I'm also doing a lot of writing. So for me, I think that the technical aspects of the format are very important to consider, both in terms of like what limitations you have, and then also what you can do with it. Because like one of the nice things about working with a game is you have gameplay, so you can do like different styles of gameplay, different forms of presentation, to make things more interesting. And then you have to consider things like, you know, art limitations, music limitations, whether or not you're working within like space constraints or time constraints. Like everything about your format plays into it. And like the other thing is, with visual novels, you have a certain like pacing style that you have to consider, which is based on the technical aspects. So like, whereas a novel, you might be able to write like a really long paragraph of description, you can't necessarily do that in a visual novel. So for me, the technical aspect is always at least in the back of my mind. And then I like to think about like, what can I do with this that's outside of the norm?
It did. This is going to be a little tangential, but I've been really enjoying the degree to which working on New Game Plus has been influencing working on Friendsim 2, because we had some ideas and we tried them with New Game Plus and we figured out how they worked, and then we can implement them in Friendsim 2. And neither of these games are out yet, but they're still building off of each other, and that's really helping, especially knowing what the RenPy engine is capable of, which is a lot because it's built on Python. So you can do all sorts of things. You can simulate all sorts of games within Python, and that, I don't know. I mentioned before the panel, I also have programming experience, and I did program like games in the Pygame engine ages ago. So I have a little bit of an idea of what you can do, but I think really for me, it's playing other visual novels and other video games, seeing what they do that like intrigues me and piques my interest, and knowing that we can probably finagle together something similar enough to fulfill an idea, and just being inspired by other works. Like I can come up with good ideas, but I can also get inspired by stuff other people do, and that's. I mean, we're literally making fan games. That's kind of the point from a storytelling perspective. So why not from a mechanics perspective too?
Arrow has a response here. It says, 100%. Both for Befriendus and Friendsim 2, I've had to ask Jonaya or Geo, can we do this? Because I have many ideas, but also this is a collaborative effort, and torturing your coders or artists isn't good.
Yes.
I relate to that so much. Geo is in the audience right now, I think.
Yes, they are.
And probably waiting for me to answer this question because of the sheer amount of times that I've come to our 2-person programming team going, can we do this? And first of all, Geo and Alien have been absolutely excellent and usually go, yeah, we can do that. But also being aware of the limitations. To me, one, yes, it's about being kind to your programming team. And on the other hand, it's also, you need to love the fact that this is a game. You need to be writing in a way that appreciates that the writing is only doing part of the storytelling, which I know sounds incredibly broad, but it's been useful to kind of, one, for me to step back and see other people who have more experience making games make decisions about this specific like gameplay style, gameplay storytelling. Arania's skip ending could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
And then just there are things that games can do in terms of just the way that the player interacts with the text. I wish I had examples, but unfortunately I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, same here.
But I think that it's really useful to figure out what tools you have and use them rather than figuring out your idea first and try to cram a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah. Our next question from Noles is, how does one go about writing a wholly original character for a Homestuck fan game? And relatedly, how does one insert them into the dynamics of pre-existing characters?
I'm going to sit this one out.
Okay.
The only character I've written is Annual Embassy, and she does not appear.
Okay, I think Bucky and I both will have stuff to say on this from New Game Plus specifically.
Yeah, that so the entire premise of New Game Plus, at least for me, well, not the entire premise. One of the goals of New Game Plus from the beginning has been, man, the Homestuck kids would probably have a much better life if they got to talk to other people besides the 3 other people that they've spoken to for their entire lives, and that's it. That's probably a good thing for them as humans. So, like, introducing a lot of new characters was important for New Game Plus, and that sort of... We were trying to fill out a society. So we're trying to fill out the different these characters need to fulfill specific requirements. Like, Jane is going to go downtown and talk to somebody who works in a restaurant. And that means that there needs to be people who are making the food, people who are like cleaning up, and there wouldn't be waiters or waitresses in our setting, but let's just say waiters or waitresses. So those people are going to interact with your characters in specific ways, which means you have goals for how they're going to, how your main character is going to interact with them. Basically, like, you need foils to bounce off of your characters. Otherwise, it just turns into minutes of just the player character and the one character focus interacting, which can get stagnant quickly. It's to introduce variety. It's to introduce problems for your characters to bounce off of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's basically where I'm at, because, like, again, like, New Game Plus has a lot of non-main character NPCs, and, like, one of the things you see a lot in fanfic is a tendency to have all of the existing characters, like, filling different roles. And, like, one of the nice things to do in a game that you're trying to broaden the scope of is you have characters that, again, like Bucky was saying, it's kind of like, okay, what functional role does this character need? Like, okay, we want, this character is at school and they need, like, classmates. They need, maybe we have a love interest or something like that. Like, who is that person? Like, how do they fit into the world? And then, like, I tend to start from, like, where does this person's role in this story, and then like building out characteristics like, you know, what do they look like, what do they act like, what's their personality, how do they talk, like you just kind of like you have a hole to fill in the story, and you start to like fill in a character that's then going to fill that role. And like I think that's very helpful with fan games in particular, because you can broaden your scope beyond like the main cast of like whatever 12 characters. Like some games are very focused on, you know, interacting directly with one person or a couple of people. Like that's kind of like the PesterQuest format is very like one-on-one, but if you're trying to make something that's a little more like broad, then it's nice to think about like what roles do I need to fill in this story, and like what kind of people are there in the world. Arrow is typing a response, so I'm going to wait till they finish before I'm going to read out what they've got to say on this too. So,
yeah. Also, real quick, the characters don't need to be super duper fleshed out. You can pick like one or two character traits and stick with them, because they might not be appearing for that long. You might not need much more.
Right.
But having a like one or two note determined way that a character is going to respond is going to help a lot to like provide contrast for your character to focus and propel the plot.
Absolutely. Also, Arrow says, "Nah, I realized y'all covered it, so we'll move on to the next one." This is an interesting one. So, Hal Drawl says, "How much are you inspired by Friendsim and PesterQuest?" You actually partially responded, not only for writing, but maybe gameplay too, even if it's not today's subject. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll take lead on this one again or something. So, like it's a very broad question, and like generally speaking, like if you're working in a format of game that resembles Friendsim or PesterQuest, I'm always kind of like aware of it. Like I liked Friendsim. PesterQuest, I have mixed feelings on, but like I appreciate what they were trying to do with it. And like I'm trying to fit into that sort of general rubric of that sort of visual novel, but I'm always trying to like, I want to push it a little bit beyond that so people have a more broad, more interesting experience that isn't just like, you know, okay, I'm just going to copy this format. As far as like writing goes, I'm like, one of the games I'm working on is a sequel to those two games, but we're trying to do like more with the story. Like we're trying to take it in a new direction. So I guess I'm kind of inspired in the sense of like, these are the characters I'm working with, and like, what can I do with them, and how can I take them and like make them something more, you know, different than the original. But like the general gameplay and stuff is kind of like, there are expectations that the fandom has, and like I think it's good to be mindful of that, so you're not like, oh, I'm just gonna make like whatever crap and you should just like it because I made it for you. Like I think it's good to be aware of that, like, okay, I kind of have like a certain standard that I'm trying to shoot for, and like, you know, so people have a good experience playing your game, which is, you know, just good to be mindful of, I think.
I think I'd say, and I do want to make sure Robin and Era get to say something too, but I do think that for me, it's about responding to the established gameplay loop, if you will, where like we have a pretty solid gameplay loop for what we expect from PesterQuest and Friendsim after you get through a few routes. Like they don't deviate much, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. That's how the game works, and it works for those games. But I think both New Game Plus and Friendsim 2 definitely responds to that gameplay loop and attempts to build onto it, where like it's much more difficult to come up with a like an original idea than it is to build. It's not much more difficult. It is a different experience to come up with an idea more from scratch than it is to build off of something existing. So we can sort of look at what we enjoyed and what we found lacking from games that exist, and then build on them, because what we find from those games is our opinion, and that's how we respond to it. It's how you make art. I don't think that our interpretation is going to be the correct interpretation, but I think that like it's one way to respond to it. That's always been the strong point of the Homestuck fandom, is that we are really good at AUs, and we're really good at taking the things that we enjoy and running with it. So yeah, it's. We definitely are inspired by it, and we definitely are saying, "Hey, this was really cool. Look what we can do with that."
Yeah, we have a response from Arrow. They say, I think that it's constantly in my mind because I don't want to fall into the trap of just copying what those two did, because at that point, why not just play Friendsim or Distantquest? So you have to stay faithful to a lot of mechanics, but you also have to differentiate it because you want your story to have its own identity, both gameplay and story-wise.
Yes.
Honestly, my fellow panelists have covered a lot of this, and I really agree with a lot of what you all are saying. So a specific thing to focus in on that I learned from Friendsim and Pesterquest is I think about the player experience, and when I was enjoying those games the most and what I found most effective, and that's definitely impacted my writing. Friendsim and Pesterquest are an interesting one to draw inspiration from because they have this very specific protagonist, and the protagonist is also any person who could hypothetically be playing it. And definitely, one, I think in general, for my early Befriendus and Distantquest writing, I was trying to stick pretty close to the Friendsim Pesterquest format, and only later giving myself permission to diverge a little bit more. Um, but I also think about when I saw that protagonist being used most effectively, and when I saw it working in a way that I felt created an enjoyable and good faith player experience. And that's been a major influence on my game writing.
Nice.
MS Par, in my opinion, is best when they actually do have defined personality traits.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't... The blank slate player has its role in certain games, but I think like MS Par has been given enough like characterization that's good to like play off of a little bit. Okay, we have a question from Tizius. What's the process for creating a volume? Like, do you do writing first, sprites first, etc.?
I can take a little of how Befriendus is doing this right now. We've recently restructured a little bit. And we are on hiatus right now, so it's a little funny to talk about this new structure. But initially, we wanted the entire scripts done. Then our writer would produce a sprites list, and that would go to the sprite artist. We've recently implemented a thing where instead, the writer completes an outline and a backgrounds list, which has always been a thing. And then there will be a point in time when the writer is far enough along in drafting that they can create a preliminary sprite list to pass off to the sprite artist, and the sprite artist can get started working. And the whole goal is to do as much concurrently as we can without putting anyone in a position where they don't have enough information or they're making too many last-minute changes. For example, for Befriendus, right now, we're not doing a lot of concurrent writing. We're making sure one script is pretty close to done before we are expecting the next writer to start, which I know is very different from development of a lot of other games. I'm not sure if I can say that one format is strictly better than the other. Just that's how we've answered the question of trying to make sure that everyone has the information they need.
Yeah.
And the last thing to talk about would just be the sprite list and character design in general, which for us, the sprite artist is pretty much entirely in charge of character design, but sometimes writers and artists will need to talk about some significant character features. I know we talked a lot. I talked a lot with Lupa about how Cancri dresses himself at this point in time, actually. That was a very fun conversation.
That's excellent.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my process is kind of like very similar in a lot of ways to what Robin described. So like what I try to do is like basically starting with an outline and then get enough of an outline to have a general idea of like what kind of character design we're looking for, what kind of background lists we have. Like I really try to build that out from the outline, and then like moving from there. So one thing for sprites is like we do a lot of like kind of paper doll type sprites where we have like a few poses and then we have expressions that we can like mix and match. So like it's a little different than some of the Friendsim and Pesterquest sprites kind of do that, and some are a little more like uniquely posed. But I try to have like a good range of like emotional states for the character, different poses, like basically so that the writers and then the people that are doing like the scene setting in the route can like have some different things to work with. Like I like to give the writers as much like possible variety as they can have with like emotional states and stuff for sprites. And then the other thing that's kind of for me is a thing I'm always thinking about is like if we're doing unique coding, that's usually going to come like concurrent with or right after the outline. So it's like if I know that I need the game to do something that Ren'Py doesn't just do by default, I'll start working on that concurrent to the script because like that's labor intensive in and of itself, and you can do a lot of it without having a script, like to make sure that the stuff is debugged and works correctly. Like I've done for Friendsim 2, we're doing some interesting stuff in a couple of the routes, and like it's a non-trivial amount of technical stuff to work at. So yeah, I try to do things as much concurrently as possible, but sometimes there are things you just have to do a step first. Like you have to have an outline before you can have a background list, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. And stuff definitely does change too. I don't be ready to throw away anything, but I would definitely be willing to say, wow, that idea that I originally came up with no longer works, and I am cool with setting it aside and either using it later or not using it.
Yeah.
It is difficult, and it feels bad, and it hurts sometimes, but sometimes your first idea is actually not your best idea.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see arrow typing, so I think maybe we've answered sufficiently for their experiences.
You guys are really solid.
Okay, next question is, where did you guys get started on your journey to become writers? When did you find out you had a passion for making stories?
Well, when I was in kindergarten, every day we got a little story thing that we could fill out, and every day I drew a picture of a fairy and said, "I love fairies," and that was really the beginning of we got the chance in 8th grade to write a movie script, and we would automatically get an A if we filmed it. And that wasn't the first time that I had written a story that I enjoyed, but that was the first time I had written a story that I was excited to show to other people, because I got to work on it with my friends, and then we like tromped around in the woods for like several weekends in a row to film a movie about I think it was called like Frenemies, and it was about like two girls who used to be friends who like hated each other, and their mutual friend decided to handcuff them together and abandon them in the middle of the woods. Classic 8th grade shit. I don't know. It's I just like, I've always been a voracious reader, and you read enough stories and eventually you're like, man, I want to try a hand at this. And then the first time it maybe doesn't work so well, and the second time it maybe doesn't work so well, and you keep writing stories and eventually they start hitting people and you're like, wow, that feels good that people like this, and then you keep making more.
Yeah. My experience is a very long-term one, because I started writing when I was like in high school, like seriously, and that was like 20 years ago. But the thing is, like I started out in a fandom writing fanfic because I always had this idea of like, oh, I really like stories. I like engaging with stories. I like narrative, and I like this fandom, and like I see areas where, you know, I felt like things could be improved or expanded upon. And so I kind of like just was like, hey, I can do that, and started writing, and then just kind of went from there. I really like telling stories. I like creating worlds and building characters, and I really like when people engage with that. So that's been my experience. Arrow has a response for us as well. Arrow says, when I was a kid, I read a lot of books, and I still do, and at some point I decided I want to make this stuff so I can get a kid who's like I was through the things I went through. That's really fucking inspiring, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a parent, I want to go back to parent myself, was like a post I saw recently. I'm like, oof, ouch, yeah. But with stories.
For me, I was kind of just always encouraged to write, so I'm not sure I have as unique a turning point story. Yeah, I remember being, oh boy, in like 1st or 2nd grade and writing a one-page Star Wars fan fiction about Han Solo's birthday. In middle school, I plotted out and thought I was going to write several novels. And as much as I still love those characters, I'm not sure those are ever going to happen. I've always loved words.
Hmm.
That's pretty much it. I love words, I love characters, I love the idea that you can connect with someone through them.
Yeah. Our next question from Techno Alchemist is, what do you guys consider to be the most important part of a story? Is it characters, theme, tone, or something else?
I can start on this one,
Sure.
and I guess I'm going to start with I'm not okay. Cop-out answer, I'm not sure most important exists, but I have a real answer. And that just is, I think that most important is different to everyone. Before I switched majors, I was a music major. And someone at a party once asked me and my fellow music major friend why we chose to major in music. And it was a good faith question. It was one of those like, why are you in an art field? Why should this matter? Questions that should feel a little itchy, but it was a completely good faith question. Um, and I was giving my answer about how I feel like music is this sort of universal language and how I'd studied the ways that like humans have cultural acclamations to certain kind of music, but that we all also tend to respond in certain ways. And my friend is next to me just making a face. So I finished my whole spiel about the connection between humans and music, and he stops and he goes, I just think there's value in making people feel good.
Yeah.
So, two very different things. So for me, I'm someone who's really drawn to characters and theme.
Nice.
I tend to write from a place where I have something to say, right? I want to write a story that is about something. But I also think that if you're someone who just really loves complex plots or solving mysteries, then those are going to be the most important part of a story to you. So I guess the answer is like what you are writing for. And then my more biased answer, and I apologize for rambling a heck of a long time on this one. In my extremely part-time day job, I am an English tutor and I'm working with a student who is a storyteller actually. So we talk a lot about why he does what he does. And so we've been talking a lot about the fact that humans tell stories and we
yeah.
have always told stories and we're probably always going to tell stories, and it's one of the ways that we kind of make sense of our world and explore being people who aren't us. And so to me, that's why even if theme isn't the most important thing to you, I feel like characters and theme are always going to be at the core of writing, because at the end of the day, you're just talking about what the world is like or what being human is like or what it isn't. But that's where I'm coming from.
Nice. Bucky, if you'd answer next, because I have my thing, and then Arrow's actually echoes like part of my thoughts, so I'll pair ours together.
Yeah. I was just gonna say yes, of course, but it really depends on like what the point of the story is to you. Like when I was writing for the Lalonde zine, which was really fun, I wanted to write a Rose character study, and it ended up being like one day on the Meteor with Rose, and she interacted with like Kadaya and Vriska and Dave Cat briefly. And the point was just like, what's Rose like? And it wasn't. It was just to explore the character. And then in New Game Plus, it's what happens to these characters in these specific thematic situations. So it's an overlap. And in Friendsim 2, it's we wanted to see what happened to these characters in the future. And again, it's characters and theme, and then the specific tone of how do I put this? Friendsim 2 is going to be serious and have stakes, but not be relentlessly grimdark, I think was what we were trying to go for. It's going to be serious, but not unfunny, and not a slog. That wasn't intended to talk about anything else. I just want to enjoy playing the game that I make.
Yeah.
But so like yeah, the answer to that question is yes, of course, depending on what you're trying to do.
So for me, it's almost always character first. Like I want to take people and I want to put them in a situation and I want to see how they react to it. I write very, very character focused writing. And so like plot and all of that other stuff is stuff that's happening around these people and to these people. And everything is in support of the character's experiences. So for me, it tends to be very character focused. And then like themes and all of that come as a result of what they're doing and what they're experiencing, what they're thinking and feeling, and then tone is something that's used to frame all of those things. And then Arrow has a response that I really like and kind of echoes something I've said as well. Arrow says, the words, I reckon. Words are probably the most important. This sounds like a cop-out, but it is very important that your story exist first and foremost, which I absolutely agree. Like, at the end of the day, if you don't have a story, you don't have a story. So you have to, like, sit down and write the thing, no matter how you get started, no matter what you're focusing on, because you can always edit something you've written, but you can't edit something that doesn't exist yet. So yeah. Cheshire Creeper has kind of a related question to that one. How do you decide on a theme for your story? And I guess, I don't know, I'll take that one. So I typically go with, like, either is there something I want to say specifically about something, or is there a specific plot that I want to explore that I can then, like, draw a theme out of? Like, theme doesn't always come out fully initially in your writing, at least not for me. A lot of times, like, as I'm doing the work, you know, stuff will start to evolve as, like, oh, hey, this story is, like, talking about something. I try to keep it in my mind as far as, like, what I want to say about things, but, like, generally speaking, I find that a lot of the theming comes from the plot of the story and, like, the way that the characters are. So, like, sometimes when you go into a story with, like, I'm gonna say a thing, you end up losing sight of, like, it being an entertaining and engaging work. So I tend to, like, keep theme in my mind, but not worry overly much about, like, what's the big message I want to send beyond, like, broad terms. Because, again, I tend to be a very character-first kind of writer.
I gotta agree with Jonaya. I when I was describing, like, what parts are the most important, I kept putting characters first, and just I definitely have all character first sort of theme. And, like, yeah, for the same thing, when I was doing my New Game Plus routes, it was, I would think of the character, and then I would think of, what does this character need to grow, and what conflicts do they keep running into? And you can't have it only be about the message you're trying to send. Otherwise, yeah, Jedi's right. Otherwise, you will end up, like, you'll just sort of end up writing something preachy. But I feel like you may end up writing something preachy, I should say. But I don't know. The characters are unique enough that you can usually drill down to, like, what the core conflicts are for these characters. Like, for Jane deals with having grown up in privilege, having conflicts with, like, the value, the idea of what the value of capitalism and society is, and, like, social isolation and social anxiety. So how do you make her deal with that? How do you set up a situation where she is going to have to run into these problems, and then how do you shuffle in enough, like, downtime, basically, if you're talking in terms of running a TTRPG? Like, you need conflict, and then you need downtime, and then you alternate between the two so that you get a good pacing, and the theme will come through based on the way that you set up the conflict.
I feel like I run the risk of sounding kind of preachy and mechanical on how I do this, but sometimes for me, theme emerges because, for me, first of all, theme and character are really closely linked. I think I must also be definable as a very character-focused writer, even though I definitely spend more time going, what am I going to say, and have sat down to some stories going, I want to make this statement. But I also find that sometimes when theme doesn't emerge right away, it will emerge because I check in with myself on theme and I go, am I saying anything that I don't want to say? Right?
Yeah,
especially if I'm writing a character who, like, if I'm writing a character who is experiencing something that I don't want to say is how every person would react in this situation, then I stop and I go, okay, how can I establish what specifically is happening here? And that almost always turns into theme. An example that happened to me recently was I was writing different fandom about two characters discussing something that one of them had gone through. she says something like, I feel like you've lost a bit of yourself. Your friends always tell me stories, and I feel like, I don't know, like you're not the person you want to be anymore. I would like to meet that person. Then I had to pause, because a major theme for this character is that after an event he goes through, he very much goes, I'm not that person anymore. I'm a different person, and I've come to terms with that. So I immediately had to go, okay, so I need to make it clear that what we're talking about is him choosing not to look at something he dislikes inside of himself, and the fact that he needs to actually look at it to heal rather than thinking he's moving forward by never looking at it. And suddenly we've got theme, just emerging from a conflict between characters. That said, I do think that in fandom, it's way easier to go in theme first, because I've been thinking about these characters for years, and very many of us have too, and so there will be ideas that are already rolling around in your brain that's like, I want to say something about this.
Yeah. Okay, let me go to our next question. Arrow's not typing, so I don't think they have anything specific here. Next one, Blue Spectacles again. How do you work through ideas starting to lose their novelty or wanting to work on another plot aspect when the one you're currently working on isn't finished? Ooh, that's a good question.
Start another project now. Don't do that. That's how you end up writing for multiple fan games. No. Honestly, taking a break and going back to reread what I've already written helps a lot. Like, you don't force yourself to work on it when you really can't think of anything. But like, I'm writing 3 routes for New Game Plus, right? And I've got writing started for a couple of them. And the 2 things that are helping me is I'm not trying to write it in chronological order all the time. I'm trying to fill in scenes, and I can always go back and edit it once I have a draft down. And I'm not trying to write one all at once, and that's keeping my little goldfish brain interested enough that I can like actually think about what I'm writing. It also helps that a couple of my characters are sort of related in terms of like what themes I'm trying to explore, even if they're coming from different perspectives.
Yeah, I guess for me, like, I kind of, because I do a lot of different aspects of the development process, and like writing is only part of that. So one of the ways I try to conceptualize like what I'm doing is that you're kind of like you're working at a craft. So like the different processes of writing are part of that craft, but like they're only part of it. So like I really try to focus on the fact that like even stuff that isn't particularly fun to do, like editing or like polishing, is going to make a stronger product in the end. So like what you're doing is a stronger piece of art, you know what I mean? So you've got like, it's really fun to be like have a new idea and be like excited about it, but then you kind of like you go through stages where it's like, okay, I've created a sketch of this, now I'm going to fill it in, now I'm going to really like finish out the details and something, and I'm going to play it through. And like I think it's very helpful for games to work through it in like seeing what you're doing as you're going along. So like getting the game into Ren'Py or whatever your engine is, and then seeing it like on the screen and starting to see it in stages. So like everything isn't all done at once, but you have like steps in the process, and to be like, okay, this is what I'm doing at this point, and like to see the value in that. Like I find it really rewarding to see like the stuff I'm making start to turn into a thing that makes sense. Like I do woodworking as well as writing and stuff, and one of the things I've said about woodworking is when you're making something, you have something that looks like garbage until you reach a certain point, and then it just transforms into something that looks like a thing. And I find that that's often true with writing too. It's like you have this like mess of an outline, and then you have this draft of a script, and then it just kind of like metamorphosizes into this like actual fucking game, and you go through it and you're like, oh, hey, that's actually pretty good. So like I try to focus on like the positive aspects of the process, so that I'm not just like, oh my god, I hate editing, basically. Arrow has a response here. Arrow says, well, I'm driven to actually finish things because it's a team-based effort, and I don't want to let them down. So completely valid.
That does help.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, that helps a lot. Until the project that I did before Distantquest was the Distant Past zine, and honestly, until that point, I had never completed and published long multi-chapter fiction. I had attempted several times, but until I had a group of people relying on me and a deadline, I had not finished it.
Yeah.
Since then, that project and Distantquest and Befriendus have taught me a lot about finishing things for myself. And I think one of them, in terms of ideas losing their novelty, inspiration does not flow all of the time. And something I think about is when something... There are two different ways that I do art. When I do visual art, I draw to the point that I enjoy it. I will draw a sketch. I will very rarely finish the sketch. Sometimes it will be half-lined and I will walk away. And that's not going to be the art that I am most focused on, most known for in the world, and it's not going to be art that I commit to finishing for other people. So that's fine. Or I will give myself writing where I get to agonize over every word and not write on it when I don't feel inspired and fixate on rhythm. And I give myself that personal writing. But there comes a point in, say, some forms of visual art where you're sitting there drawing, you're just hatching, and you're just hatching for like half an hour, right? And if you are able to do that, then that means you are able to complete that type of product. And I think that anyone can grow the discipline for it. There's no hidden talent here. It's just a matter of, do I feel like dedicating the time to grow that discipline? And for writing, it's hard because you're not necessarily going to generate ideas when you don't feel like generating ideas. So the other thing is when you say wanting to work on another plot aspect when the one you're working on isn't finished, often when I get that urge, it is because I need to. Not always. Sometimes I need to buckle down and go, I need to finish this plot point because I need to know what happens here before I know what happens next. But often it really means that I need to write non-linearly. And then once I've written the later plot aspect, I'm able to approach, okay, how do I connect these two ideas with more clarity?
Our next question from Gio is kind of a inverse of a previous question. It says, in fan writing, there's naturally a lot of writing characters who already exist. How do you reverse engineer characters enough to write in their voices?
I actually have some really specific thoughts about this, if you don't mind me taking...
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Taking a shot at it first. So, I have a few very specific steps I do when I'm trying to learn a new character. Some very mechanical things are there words that they overuse? This one's a really easy signal. Not every character has it, but for example, I would try writing, I will compare it to the characters, I'll see what I'm getting wrong. One thing I noticed years ago, early in my Cankry writing, is that personally, I overuse the word very. Cankry uses the word really. Really little distinguishing things like that. I look at a character's sentence structure. And then I also try to figure out their mental filters. Some characters are never... The words are never going to flow out uninhibited. Some characters are extremely intentional with their words. Some characters just struggle to transform their thoughts into words. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have characters who feel very at home talking. Those are the characters that are easier for me to write because they're the ones that I relate to more. So the thoughts will just tumble out. And once you figure out their mental filters, I go through this process of what are they feeling, right? What do they personally interpret that as, whether they're correct about themselves or wrong? And then, do they choose to just express that right away, or do they pause and go, what action am I going to take about this? And if they're on that step 3, what action am I going to take about this? Then you decide, how do they choose to talk and present themselves? So I tend to just try to dig as deep into the character as I can, figure out their filters in different situations, and figure out how they would then present themselves. But there's also that mechanical stuff like vocabulary, words they overuse, words they avoid.
Era has a response, and my response, I think, dovetails onto theirs, so I'll read theirs first. Era says, simple, disregard canon, be better than canon, dethrone God, and consume his flesh. And I will say, so I tend to be a very, like, vibe-focused kind of writer when it comes to existing characters. Like, I focus a lot less on the, like, specifics of, like, words and sentence structure and all that, which is not a criticism on doing that, but, like, I try to drill down to, like, what is this character kind of, like, about mentally? Like, where are they as far as like how they think and feel about things, how they react to things, like the general way that they talk, like because I'll change speech patterns around, I'll change quirks when I find them annoying. I hate question markless quirks. They're very, very irritating. And like I'll change stuff around, but I want to have it feel like kind of the essence of the character. And so like especially when you're writing something that is picking up later on, you like people will change, people will grow, people will change like how they present themselves, but there's gonna be some connecting line between like how they thought and how they think and how they felt and how they feel. So I try to like drill into that, and then also I try to think about like, how do I want to change this character intentionally and why? So like sometimes to make changes to a character because like there are issues with the original presentation of the character, or they've grown as a person, or they're in a new situation that's causing them to think differently about things. So like, yeah, I try to focus very much on like what the feeling is of the character, how they think about things, how they would respond to a situation, and then like get inside their heads basically, which is what I try to do with every character, but with like canon characters, I kind of like use the source material as a basis for that.
Highly recommend reading things out loud, both for editing purposes and seeing what flows. Like, characters often have a specific cadence, especially if they're a more popular character that has like some voice acting interpretations. Doesn't work for every single character, but it does, like, sometimes just reading stuff out loud helps. It helps to make sure that your writing flows. It helps to see if you've, like... Sometimes it helps you pick up on grammatical and spelling errors that your eyes have been skimming over for the past 6 hours, and it helps you figure out if you like what your character is saying.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming down to about a half hour left on the panel, so I'm going to start picking questions that I think are particularly interesting, because we probably won't have time to answer everyone's questions, unfortunately. Y'all are being really fucking great about this. Like really, really good questions. I actually saw one down near the bottom that I definitely wanted to hit, because I think it's a really like important thing to think about. Crab asks, when writing fan creations with characters already established as controversial or problematic, do you think it's possible to actually write character flaws to be in the right in order to evolve people's perspectives on said character? Not trying to write characters as perfect Mary Sues, but attempting to create their worldview as something actually believable in order to allow audience sympathy when originally said character worldview was always terrible. Is this even a good idea? Sorry for the probably long and unreadable question. I'll take lead on this one. I think that's really like, I have two thoughts on that. One is contextualizing a character that's, we'll say, problematic, for lack of a like more coherent way of putting that, like controversial. Contextualizing why they acted the way they did, and then changing the character in a way that implies growth. So like, I think it's more interesting for characters that are like bad characters or do bad things to understand like why they did it. And sometimes the reason for that is because they're a bad person or they don't care about other people. But like, I think there's a tendency to be very simplistic with characters that do bad things, where it's just like, oh yeah, they're just a bad person. And like, I don't think that that's a very interesting thing to write about. So I really like to explore characters in the sense of like, why do they act the way they do? And like, I've written some pretty not great characters, like not so much, well, no, that's not true. I've in the work for fan games I have, but like in writing fanfic, I've written some pretty like bad characters. I just finished writing a fic about the Times Apprentice version of Mindfang, who is like irredeemably awful. And like, I think that it's interesting to be like, okay, so what's going through this character's head? Like, why do they justify their actions to themselves? And then there's also characters where like the things that they've done are contextualized in some way, and I think it's important to like explore that, because you can have a more interesting, more fleshed out story, and like you can have characters that are controversial. You can have characters that do and think and feel bad things. But like, it's more effective, I think, if you explain that rather than just being like, yeah, they're bad because the narrative says they're bad, which I think is like, it's pretty simplistic, and I don't love it. So yeah.
It's Homestuck. A lot of these characters suck. That's kind of the intriguing bit. I'm being rude. It's much more interesting to write complex characters who fuck up than it is to write characters who never make a mistake in their lives. So like it's just important to write them. There's a way to write characters making mistakes where the narrative is sympathetic to them and doesn't allow them to grow, and there's a way to write characters that make mistakes where like it's part of what's making them develop as a character. I'm going to bring this back around to TTRPG stuff again because that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's not fun when when a character fails a roll and you're just like, it doesn't work. Like that doesn't progress the story at all. If you just say, that stops working, don't do that. It's more useful if you I forget exactly how Thirsty Sword Lesbians described it. It's more useful if you use it as I think it describes them as like successful rolls as upbeats and failed rolls as downbeats, where it's just a part in the story where like the character doesn't quite get what they needed, but something happens anyways. Failing forward, yes, that is a good way to put that. Every failure when you are writing a story, you are choosing what is happening to the characters, and yes, that seems very obvious, but you are actively choosing what those mistakes and failures mean. So you want them to have a purpose, usually. Even if it's not immediately apparent why it fails, you want it to mean something. So writing Vriska is interesting because you need to take... Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a really good game for teaching how to use falling forward because like it's very good at picking out it's good at it's an RP heavy game basically. The dice are there to dice rolls should be used to facilitate the story, not inhibit it. And Thirsty Sword Lesbians is very good at that. Same thing with writing. You want... If Vriska is going to be an asshole and be mean to somebody, it's going to have to be for a reason. It's not just to say Vriska's mean, so I'm going to make her mean. It's Vriska's mean, so she's mean to somebody in a community, and that's going to have consequences for her later, and she's going to need to learn something from that. The people in real life make mistakes and don't learn from things all the time. People in stories that are shut up, Arrow. People in stories that make a mistake are making a mistake because you told them to make a mistake and you're doing it for a reason, and it's probably tied to the theme or the point you're trying to make about the character.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll let Robin go, and then I'll read Arrow's response.
I am writing Cankryvantus.
End of sentence.
I have been role-playing Cankryvantus for something over 6 years. So I'm not going to talk about what we're doing with him in Befriendus, except that one interesting thing to talk about here is that I do have a lot of experience writing him after he's gone through a little bit of growth, but in Befriendus we're taking him back in time. So it's also interesting that character growth isn't always an option. Anyway, without talking specifically about what we're doing in Befriendus, I can definitely talk about some of my experience with that character as a whole, because I think he really exemplifies this question. Because there are 3 different ways that I answer it with Cankry. Let's take... Okay. There are things that Cankry is accused of by the narrative that are nonsense. There are things Cankry is accused of by the narrative that are actual real problems. Cankry slut-shames, and Cankry does some really gross ableist things. So to focus on the slut-shaming situation right now with Porum, there are easily a couple ways to take it. And if you're someone who relates to Cankry or just really loves him, it's easy to decide, well, he's really only reacting to Porum being so terrible to him. Or he's really only reacting to, I don't know, other people that she reminds him of having been terrible to him, because Cankry has experienced trauma, and so this is all just a reasonable response to someone who doesn't respect him, and she's the bad guy and he's not. And it's easy to do that because it makes you feel more comfortable liking a character. And to an extent, if that's the way you want the character to live in your head, as long... I'm not going to continue that actually. But so that's one easy direction to take him. But it's important, in my opinion, to let characters be wrong. I really adored what Bucky was saying about when characters make mistakes, there are two ways to take them. Either it can be, I'm actually going to twist it for my own purposes here. Either it can be just a pity party in which your character has done no wrong, or there can be some character meat to it. And I think that's kind of essential. So when I look at recontextualizing a character, it's important to me that what I'm writing is not a they were right manifesto, right? And instead it's a this is this person, this is how they are, this is the ways in which they've been treated unfairly by the narrative, and these are the mistakes that they're genuinely making and the ways that they're screwing up for the people around them.
Yeah.
I've definitely go for it.
Everyone thinks they're Dumbo. Everyone watches Dumbo and thinks they're Dumbo. If you write a character that messes up, people are going to relate to that character messing up because everyone's messed up at some point. So it's not a matter of like proving that character is right. It's a matter of proving that you have enough context in a situation to like not automatically assume that you personally haven't like made the wrong decision. And that is really difficult because that involves a lot of personal feelings about how you personally might react to something. But everyone thinks they're Vriska. Everyone thinks they're Dumbo.
We have an answer from Arrow, which I think is also kind of like very directly tied into what we've been saying. Arrow says, pretty much every Homestuck character besides Caliborn is a victim of the system, and I think that showing how the system ended up making them do what they did fleshes them out a lot. That doesn't mean you have to justify what they did, but you should at least make it justifiable from the character's point of view, which I think is important. I'm going to...
Can I tack one more thing on this before we move on to the next
go for
question?
it. While you do that, I'm going to pick another question to answer. So yeah, go for it. What are your thoughts?
I think that one really important thing here too is that it's really easy to love a character so much that you either remove a sense of agency or remove a sense of this being a whole teenager or whole adult. And I think that in the end, that can frequently be a disservice to the character.
So we have like 3 related questions, which I'm going to kind of bundle together. So we have a question about how do we keep track of our ideas? What resources, analog or online, have we found the most helpful in the process of writing and development? And we have on outlining, do you use any specific tools or software? So I would say like general question about like what kind of tools and like methods do we use to kind of keep track of everything and help with the outlining and writing process?
God, we've been using Google Docs, Google Drive, Notion, Discord, Twine, RenPy, Geo.
Arrow says I just throw my ideas down in Discord when I have them. I'm a very like I use a lot of Google Docs. Notion is really useful. Like any kind of like a board system where you can kind of like keep track of like characters and stuff is really nice because you can
Trello.
Yeah, Trello or Notion or some similar thing where you have like the ability to keep characters straight. Like we have a character Bible for New Game Plus and we have a character Bible for Friendsim 2, where it's like we keep track of all of the characters, like ages, descriptions, people that are working on them, basic information, so that like you have some coherent view of like what is this character like. And then like one thing I'll say very specifically for like the programming end of it and like the putting it in RenPy end of it, Notepad++ is such a useful tool because you can have it like highlight code in RenPy stuff. Like it works really well with Python. So like having something that does code highlighting is invaluable. Also having something that can can do spaces as tabs because RenPy code doesn't recognize tabs.
Also, I want to bring up something that Gio's actually tweeted about before. Discord is not a good tool for like archiving stuff. It's technically good for organizing stuff in terms of talking to people, but like they're not obligated to keep up the servers. They're not obligated to keep all of your messages. They might go like the server could go down at any time. Just like if you're gonna archive or keep your own records.
Exactly.
If it's possible for you to get like an external hard drive to back stuff up, do that. Keep copies of your use Google Drive or CryptPad is a good encrypted alternative to Google Drive. Like use that for collaboration, but keep hard copies of your shit and back it up because like. It could be deleted at any time, and we have run into that before. So, back up your shit. Do not only rely on cloud-based stuff. Do not only rely on Discord for archiving stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Bucky briefly mentioned Twine, and I haven't actually used Twine for any of the Friendsim writing, but I've been using it for some personal writing. For me, Twine is intended to be the actual finished product, the actual game that you play. But it's also, I'm aware, used for a lot of pre-game writing, and I think it's a very, I think it's a useful tool if you're writing something that has a lot of branching choices. So if you don't know about it, Twine essentially gives you this little bulletin board full of note cards, and this very intuitive markdown that you can use to... The simplest and first thing you learn on Twine is to make a list of choices, and when you click one, it takes you to a different note card. It has a lot of other functions, things like inventory and health systems and so on. But if you're looking to outline something with a lot of branching choices, anything that is kind of choose your own adventure style, I found it really useful for that. And then just from a broader team organizing perspective, I've learned so much about how to use Google Sheets. It's been so important in terms of keeping a team organized.
Very useful.
I have been using Google Sheets since 2008, and I know how to use Google services. There are things I don't like about it. God damn if I don't know how to use them.
This is going to be this next question is a very, probably specific to, Bucky and I, but I think it'll be a quick answer, and I think it's interesting. Kyle Nickel asks, how do you go about recruiting voice actors for fan game projects, if any? And if you do, what software do you use for tracking recorded lines with their script entries? Yeah.
Over the last year and a half, I have had the pleasure of meeting a lot of really cool people who do a lot of really fun voices, and not all of them necessarily advertise that they are voice actors, but one of the things that I do regularly with Will at Homestuck is fan fiction reads, and I grip my friends by the wrists. I'm like, you are now going to voice things with me, and I get to bust out Alabama and Cankry, and Jonaya gets to bust out Irish Porum, and all those fun things. And having fun messing around doing voices with your friends is actually a great way to figure out how if people can voice act. I'm not going to say you should only do stuff with your friends. Sometimes getting out of your social circle is also good, but fandom is more fun with your friends. Voice acting fan fiction is fun. That's most fun I have to contribute.
So if we're doing voice acting for Friendsim too, and one thing that does help is having connections within existing voice acting circles and project servers. So a lot of the we've precast roles because of people that we know, and we have a voice director who's very involved in doing dubs and stuff. So unfortunately this is an area where know someone with connections does help, but also if you put out a call on Casting Call Club, or you start to ping different Homestuck boards, or you post on Twitter and stuff, people will want to do voices. Like, it's fun to do voices for characters. You will get people to do it. And then as far as like organization, so if you're working in RenPy, RenPy has a very specific like dialogue tagging system. And what I do is I actually build up a spreadsheet that's built from the dialogue extract that's then used to build the script for the VAs. And then that's basically like I make a spreadsheet that has like the dialogue tag for the RenPy line, and then that's used as the file name because it has to be. But that's the way of like tracking all the recording lines and their associated entries. So like lots of spreadsheets is kind of the answer for that. As far as software for like audio stuff, I just use Audition because I'm a dumb Adobe whore. Sorry, that was a bit much, but yeah. I really do like I use the Adobe products. I don't know if like is the right word.
Did we mark us Panelist 18 plus, Jonaya?
No, I shouldn't have said that. But I use the Adobe stuff, and then I use spreadsheets to track all of the actual VA stuff. But as far as recruiting goes, like putting out the word of your project and being like, hey, you want to talk for a game? Like, people like doing that. It's a lot of fun. And you'll find people to like audition and stuff. Yeah, Audition CS6. Audition's actually a legitimately good program. Okay, Arrow is unfortunately going to be ducking out, so we appreciate very much them coming to give their thoughts and stuff. Check out Befriendus and check out some of Arrow's writing. Also, Midnight City when it comes
Midnight
out.
City.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Arrow
did all the writing in the
Midnight.
Midnight. Yeah. Arrow did the writing in the Midnight City teaser from the expert last night.
Yeah. So okay. So I'll grab another question. Since the VA stuff is like really specific, like not a lot of fan games do it because it is a lot of work to produce, and like we're very fortunate that we have a voice director who has like experience doing that. Like if it weren't for Anna, Articulately Composed, who is our voice director for Friendsim 2, we wouldn't be doing voice acting for Friendsim 2.
I
Before we
just
move
want
to the next, say your thing first.
To answer Jet's question really quickly, I do not refrain from making puns.
Yeah, no, I make puns too.
Oh, this is unrelated to the current topic.
Yes.
Before we move to the next question, I need to jump back to the previous one because I recommended Twine, and I need to warn people who are as non-computer savvy as me.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast to my fellow panelists who are still currently here, I know jack diddly squat about computers. So I wrote an entire interactive poem on Twine. I was feeling really good about it. It was not far toward done, but like a third of the way toward done. And then I cleared my cookies. And what I had not done was download Twine or create an account.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, you will lose your writing. Use Twine, but download it or create an account.
Yeah. I downloaded it.
That's the cautionary tale.
I use Twine for like branching dialogue planning. Like I'm pretty good about keeping branching stuff in my brain, but like I'm doing a lot of branching stuff for the route I'm currently starting to write for Friendsim 2, so I wanted to be like a little more organized. Let's see what we've got here as far as questions go. We've probably got time for a few more. Here's another one that might be a short answer. We have a question from Taliburn. What do you think about non-Friendsim-esque fan game, like some kind of story-driven RPG?
I think heck yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. That sounds really cool.
Yes, absolutely yes, 1000% yes. I was actually I was just kind of a teensy bit disappointed that last 24 hours of such and such expo trailer wasn't like a top-down Lisa the Painful style RPG.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to make Homestuck the Painful, please, I will.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can give you money, but I will enthusiastically support you.
I love visual novels a lot, and I love writing visual novels, but I think it is important to like try different formats and what they bring to storytelling, and then like I think that adding components to visual novels that are non-standard to help differentiate them and make them interesting. Like good solid writing is kind of the core of the visual novel experience, but like having a little bit of a hook, having something interesting in there is good too. So yeah, I would definitely say awesome if you want to do other games. Just do bear in mind that they're going to imply their own like limitations and benefits as far as storytelling and pacing and stuff.
I wonder if any of the games that we're working on are going to have non-visual gameplay
Shut up.
loops in the... Man, I wonder if that's going to be the thing that's going to
Right,
happen. I
like-
wonder if there will be several different types of gameplay
Yeah.
loops that may or may not happen.
But yeah,
Yes, it's a
Friendsim
fishing
2
minigame. You fucking
you
got
got
us.
us. You got us. Let's see. Oh, here's another interesting kind of like beyond just writing itself, but I think related to writing. Haldral asks, this question may sound weird, but what is the place of music in your writing? Do you plan which music you want to play during a scene after writing it, or does music help imagine a scene that leads your writing, for example, with rhythm? So yeah, I'm curious about that.
You know, one of the things that has inspired me most about Homestuck is that Andrew Hussey has said that that the music was, I mean, the music came out before they made a bunch of those flashes, right?
Mhm.
And that's always been incredibly cool, is because it's the opposite in when you're in like Hollywood, they use filler music that ends up having an impact on the music that's composed. But in Homestuck fandom, we often, in fandom in general, we often have the complete opposite experience where we listen to a song, we get inspired by it, and then we make something out of it. In New Game Plus, the writing is sort of coming before the music in the sense that we're just sort of like hoping that not hoping, we're either saying this is what we have and the musicians are making something, the musicians already had something in mind, or we're using pre-existing music. But Friendsim 2, we've commissioned the music, so it's either coming before or concurrently with the writing, which means like for my Friendsim 2 route, I definitely plan on listening to the music that has already been made to influence my route.
Yeah.
Yes, music before the writing creates the animatic in your head for your favorite song effect. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I typically I definitely I do listen to a lot of background music when I'm writing, and that doesn't necessarily, I try to pick music that fits my mood, so that's not really influencing the writing. But I think that keeping the music in mind for a game is very important, as far as like what kind of tone do I want to set with this. Like, do I want to go for like a character theme? Do I want to go for a tonal theme? And then like working with musicians to create that more sort of like, one of the things I think it's overlooked a lot with games, because of like budget and time constraints, is having a soundscape. So having music and then having sound effects, which like, even if they're not a major part of the game, like they definitely help to build out the scene and make it feel more deep and more real. And like some of the most effective stuff I've seen with like visual novels is like using music. Like one of the things that struck me about the Snowbound Blood visual novel is that it uses music, like at least in a few of the routes, it uses music in a way that's not necessarily like one theme per character. Like the first route in particular does a good job of like, it has like emotional themes that kind of like fit to what's happening in the story. And I think that that's something that it's really good to work with, and there are a lot of really talented composers in the Homestuck fandom, so take advantage of that if you can.
So many good composers.
I have just a shorter answer to this, because for the projects I've been on, we've mostly done music after the writing, or at least after the writing is hypothetically usually winds up happening kind of concurrently, but my usual experience is that I'm not listening to the finished product before the script is nearly done, or completely done. In the Signless's case for Distantquest, I didn't hear the music until the script was totally done and shipped. But I do think that the experience of working with these composers has impacted my writing and my game writing specifically, just because it's yet another piece of this story is not... When you're writing something that is designed to be read on the page, and that's it, you're writing a piece of fan fiction or a poem or a short story or what have you. That's it. That's everything they get. When you're writing for a fan game, you're not in control of the story. You're writing the words that are behind the story, and that does a lot of heavy lifting sometimes. But you're not in control as much of how they land and how they're couched. One of my favorite examples of this was for the Signless's route for Distant Quest. I was thrilled when the music came in because I finished the script and I was like, You know, something I missed is I never quite hit on that like revolutionary fire energy, and then the song happened, and so I felt like it filled in a gap. Um, yeah, that's it though. Especially when you're working on a, it's different when you can commission music because you're describing what you want. When you're working on a passion project, my philosophy is it needs to be everyone here's passion project. If they are going to be contributing just out of passion as opposed to you are commissioning them. And that just means that the interpretation of the character is up to committee in a really weird and unpredictable and beautiful way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, limitations breed better art.
And I think we're kind of running up on time, but I think we have time for one more, and there's one that I kind of wanted to answer. Sort of two questions that I think we could kind of combine. So we have Daft, who says, talk about the process for coming up with Friendsim 2 and how you respond to the current culture of what the fandom needs to move on. And Techno Alchemist, in the next question, says, did the epilogues in Homestuck 2 affect your stories in any way? So I think there's like a general question about like, how do you respond to the current work and like the current culture of fandom? So I guess I'll take the lead on this one. So I think that like what's going on with the existing work that we're basing our things off of is always something that like I try to be cognizant of, but never let drag my writing down. Like, I don't want to write a story that is just a response to existing canon, because I think that tends to get very, like, it's either very, like, shallow, or it's very kind of bitter if you don't like what canon is doing, or it's just very, like, I feel like it co-opts the identity of your writing in a very unproductive way. So, like, I try to be aware of like the themes and the things that are raised as issues and like the stuff that canon or official works do well or do not well, and then respond to that in an indirect way. Like, okay, Friendsim 2 is a sequel to Friendsim and Pesterquest, so we have established events, and we're going to be like, okay, well, what are we saying on top of that, and how does that tie back to the original works? And like, I'm not making a game that's like point for point responding to like all the Pesterquest routes I didn't like or whatever nonsense. I'm trying to say something unique, but I'm also trying to be aware of like what was said in the past. And I think you can respond meaningfully to that, but like, I don't think it's good to get dragged into it because like you're never going to escape. Like, you're always going to be fighting against like, well, how does this compare to canon, as opposed to telling your own story, which even though you're making a fan game, I think is very important.
Yeah, like, there's the internet attitude of, like, fuel yourself with spite is, like, funny and can sometimes help you, but it's not always the best response. Like, literally, last SOCCON, when we were coming up with the New Game Plus, or, like, right before it, when we were coming up with the New Game Plus, yeah, I am not gonna deny that I have been mad about things that have happened in the dubiously canon landscape. However, I was more interested in exploring, like, the things I was actually interested in. Like, I'm mad about decisions that I saw as missed opportunities, and I would like to take advantage of those opportunities, but I can also do that without, like... Part of what I disliked was the... like, incessant, preaching, I guess. And, like, I think I said this before, but, like, if you only stick with, like, trying to teach your audience something, then you're gonna end up preachy. And, like, I enjoy a Kankri. I specifically like grabbed Robin and some other Vantis and Kankri enjoyers so that I could make sure that I was accurately assessing Kankri's character for an upcoming Will at Homestuck video. But like, I don't know. You can't. Preaching to your audience will eventually lose your audience. And I would much rather make something that people are going to enjoy than, like, try to mold my audience. You don't get to choose how your audience responds to your art.
Exactly.
You just get to make it and release it and hope that, it'll also fall flat if it's boring. You just get to release it and hope that you get you get the reaction you want, but people who do not have your lived experience will always respond to your art in a different way than you intended, and that is the point of art.
Yeah, I have less to say on this, but honestly, I think first of all, full disclosure, I did not finish the epilogues. I have read very little Homestuck 2. I read enough of Candy to understand that it did not want me there. I said, "Okay, you do not want me here," and I left.
Yeah.
Smart.
But in general, I think it you can learn how not to hurt people. Is I think a lot of what you can take away from what's going on in the current Homestuck fandom. You can experience the ways that people are choosing to hurt other people, and you can learn how not to do that while still respecting yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really like kind of part of the core. That's sort of at the heart of my writing is like dealing with things that can be very messy and very, bad and nasty and confrontational, but like kind of like one of the keys of my writing is that no matter how bad things are, you always have some kernel of hope. You always have some element of like being able to make things better or find a place within those bad situations where you can preserve some sense of, good and light and right in the world. And like even not though I write some depressing ass shit, I try to imbue it with a kernel of hope. So I think that like as far as returning, I've seen a lot of very like cynical stuff in some of the like later post-canon Homestuck, and like I understand where a lot of that's coming from, and I don't want to be like bitter about it. I want to say like, okay, well, I see what you're doing, and here is my way of like spinning that and changing things around. So yeah, I agree. I want to end on that. I'm going to end the panel on trying to keep like some element of positivity in your writing. I think if you get consumed by bitterness or cynicism, and this is not to say you can't write bitter or cynical things, but like if that consumes your writing, that will become the identity of your writing, and I think that ultimately is going to turn your audience off, because like at the end of the day, I don't think people want to just read like grimdark literally all the time. Like that sucks. It's not fun. So we are running out of time, unfortunately. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. I really appreciate y'all having so many good questions, a lot of really good discussion. I hope that you all enjoyed this. I hope that you got something out of it that can help you with your own writing, or like gave you more insight into the environment. This is kind of an experiment as far as doing like a Q&A style panel for me, so I think it went really well, and I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. I'd like to thank Bucky and Robin and Arrow. Excellent writers, really good people to work with. I've had a really good time with this. So yeah, really quick before we get the next panel, if y'all want to give some quick promos or shout outs or anything like that, and then we will turn it over to the next people.
Robin?
All I have to say is I would like to promo Befriendus. We are on hiatus right now, but if there is anything you want to know about our process behind the game, I believe our Curious Cat is currently open, and we definitely have writers who would be interested in talking shop.
Yeah. You can find me at radicallydifferent.space. You can find my podcast at will@homestuck.com. Like I mentioned, we're working on Friendsim 2, and the New Game Plus is at hsnewgameplus.com. Midnight City is, I think it's MN City Game
on Twitter. Yeah.
On Twitter. And then I'm also down to, you can like add to me in the Will at Homestuck server, and I'm also happy to answer questions if you had anything for me about any of my other games.
Yeah.
I should give socials properly. I botched that. Befriendus is at Befriendus Game on Twitter. I am at Rhythmic on Twitter, or Rhythmic-Idealist on Tumblr.
And I am, my personal Twitter is at AltUniverseWash. I post a lot of random stuff, mostly about Homestuck. And I would encourage you all to follow Friendsim2, which is friendsim2.com, or at Friendsim2 on either Twitter or Tumblr. We have opened up applications for both background or end card artists, and also voice actors. So going back to the voice acting discussion, if you are interested in trying your hand at some voice acting and will be 18 by October 1st of this year, then feel free, go to application.friendsim2.com to apply. But again, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for participating. This was a lot of fun. I'd like to thank everyone in chat. Y'all were super awesome, really good discussion, and really good questions. So I'm really happy with that. But we are going to turn it over to the next panelist. There is actually going to be a panel in this panel room about the Paradox Space comics. So speaking of fanworks and well-known fanworks, we have a number of the Paradox Space folks have some like cut content and like lost media kind of stuff. So it should be really interesting. But yeah, again, thank you all very much. Really genuinely appreciate it. And I hope to see you around, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the con.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.